Hello, peace be upon you. Today I will talk about some important information related to cognitive biases that we often experience but we seldom notice. A cognitive bias is a systematic error in our thinking that occurs when people are processing and interpreting the information they have about the world in which they live. And often this type of errors uh, affect our decision making process. We should remember here that human beings are not neutral, so they are always subjective because they live in a subjective social world. As a qualitative researcher in social sciences, we should be aware of cognitive biases that people may have. This awareness will be helpful to bracket our assumptions and preconceptions and to stay close to the underlying meanings of the data. The first bias that we will see here, it is anchoring bias. Usually, the first piece of information we see it as very important, and sometimes we see it as the only correct information that we have. This over reliance on the first piece of information is called anchoring bias. There are some other forms of anchoring biases. For example, grabbing information from only one source or getting information that are collected through only one method. This is called common source bias. Similarly, sometimes we also use to follow a traditional approach to do things. For example, familiar research methods or more conventional research methods. And then we hardly go for alternative approaches, and in fact, we hesitate to be more innovative. Such biases are called as law of the instrument. For example, it is phrased as if all you have is a hammer, then everything will be look like a nail. Another somehow related bias is conservative bias or conservativeness bias. And this is about our rigidity to follow our beliefs and ignoring or sometimes even opposing the new evidences and the new information that may cause a challenge to our beliefs. Now, the confirmation bias. Confirmation bias means to attend, trust, and use the information that meets our preconceptions. For examples, the researchers citing the literature that supports their hypothesis while ignoring the other literature that may challenge their hypothesis. So, this is a common problem among research students that they try to find and cite the supported literature. And another example would be that it is very hard to talk about climate change with the people who have their self supported information against the notion of climate change. Another form of confirmation bias is expectations bias. For example, we publish the evidence or data that meets our expected outcomes, and we disregard or ignore or reject the data that conflicts with our expected outcomes. A similar bias in this connection is called observer expectancy bias or observer expectancy effect. This is about our tendency to unintentionally manipulate the experiment or misinterpret the data or information we have just to meet the expected results that we believe as true. Now, I will talk about a very interesting bias that is called egocentric bias. Egocentric bias is very interesting. It is our tendency to believe in our approach, our perspective, our opinion, and our experience as the only true reality. And then another perspective or opinion does not matter for us because we don't think that is a valid or true perspective that we should believe. It has several types, but here I am taking only those famous or famous biases that are more connected to information related biases. One type of egocentric bias is blind spot bias, and this is about believing ourselves as neutral or less biased than others. I mean, seeing others as biased is a tendency that make us feel better than others because we find ourselves less biased or even neutral, and even though it may not be our true position, but we will believe in that. Perhaps that is why this bias is named as a blind spot bias. Here, just for fun, I would say, for example, a quantitative researcher, when assumes himself or herself as more objective than the qualitative researcher, to whom he or she believes they do a research that cannot be validated, then I would say that quantitative researchers may be having a blind spot bias. This this example may be best fit in it, but it is just for fun. And quantitative researchers, please don't mind it. Okay, next. Another type is illusion of validity, and that is our tendency to overestimate the accuracy of our judgment, especially when we also have confirmation biases. Then we used to do or experience this type of bias. In other words, I may declare my study as validated because it includes all the information that is in line with its findings. And that is an illusion of validity because I, having confirmation biases, did not include or put to debate the information that was not consistent with it. This type of bias I have often observed in students' theses when they claim that their findings are inconsistent with or in line with the given information or the literature. Now, let us add another type of egocentric bias here, and that is overconfidence effect. And it is, as the name suggests, about being overconfident about our answers, our information, our interpretation, and our opinions. This overconfidence moves us to uh, give taken for granted statements in our research or give sweeping generalizations in our research writing. In short, our excessive confidence is often make us to commit logical errors. Well, as I said that there are many types of biases, but I am only taking those biases that are more related to information related biases, and they are helpful for the researchers to know. Uh, let us see three other biases that are connected. The first one is base rate fallacy bias or base rate neglect. It is the tendency to ignore general information while focusing specific information. This results in the loss of important information that we may get from general information sources. For the researcher, it is very important to expand their scope of information, including more general information that may add value to their understanding and their interpretation as well. Another one or another bias is stereotyping. It is a common bias that makes us think about a group as having negative characteristics, and then we tend to believe it as true for each individual of that group. This bias restricts our understanding about the individuals and even about the groups. Often, stereotyping does not have a sound systematic logic to believe something as negative or as a general characteristic of a group. In fact, several other biases provide foundation to do stereotyping. Selective perception is another bias, and that is about our tendency of our expectations to lead our perceptions. Sometimes our presumptions and expectations, if they are not bracketed, they interfere with our data centered interpretation, and we use our perceptions that are often directed by our presumptions or preconceptions, and then we try to twist or tilt the findings or the interpretations according to our selective perception. That is why the Brechting is considered a very important skill in qualitative research. In fact, almost all these biases that I talked about today may be dealt with Brechting. What is important? You should ready you should be ready to register and recognize your own biases. Okay, thank you. I hope this information will help you to make a list of your own biases whenever you experience them during research. Thank you and stay blessed.